In San Diego, California, they remember Sol Trujillo. I've come here because it's the last place in the United States Mr. Trujillo held a full-time position. Between late 2000 and early 2003, he was the CEO and chairman of a technology company called Graviton. The company was housed here in this building at La Jolla, San Diego's Silicon Valley. Investors believed its cutting-edge technology promising enough to pour $60 million into the company. Graviton hired Sol Trujillo to take the company to the next level.
And how did he perform?
I'd say he performed dismally. It was kind of a shame because we had a lot of very, very bright research engineers working very hard on developing technology, and I think we were making some progress.
Graviton, in terms of management and product development strategy, was the most dysfunctional startup company I've ever worked with.
Concerns quickly emerged among some employees that Mr. Trujillo didn't fully appreciate Graviton's technology.
I remember his famous comment to the RF engineers, "Radio is radio, there's nothing new in radio." And I looked over at them and they were shocked. They were developing new things in radio, and he was telling them, well, why are you doing that? It's the same old stuff. It shouldn't be any problem.
Wasn't that a core part of Graviton's strategy?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Graviton was still developing its technology and had no sales, but Sol Trujillo rapidly increased the size of management.
Do you think for a startup company it was top-heavy?
Extremely top-heavy. It was extremely top-heavy. There weren't enough groups, there weren't enough departments within the company to support 11 vice presidents and directors. It was absolutely very, very top-heavy.
Just over 2 years after Sol Trujillo took over at Graviton, the company had burnt through nearly all its money and was heading for collapse. Instead, it was bought out by another company.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to Sol Trujillo.
At the National Press Club earlier this year, Sol Trujillo blamed the demise of Graviton on the dot-com crash at the start of this decade.
You can look at Sun, you can look at Cisco, you can look at Microsoft, you can look at virtually every company. In that period of time, they lost value. In the case of Graviton, we built a great product, ready to go to market. The problem is, in that period of time, post-Y2K, nobody was buying.
But Rudy Fisher disagrees that Graviton was simply a victim of its times.
Absolutely not. I think it would have succeeded. I think that with the money that we burned through, if we had managed it better and developing the technology, we would have made a lot of traction in the marketplace.
So the difference between Graviton succeeding and failing really came down to Sol Trujillo?
Not totally, but to a great extent, I think it did, yes.
Well, clearly Sol Trujillo didn't get his job at Telstra because of his performance here in San Diego with Graviton. Far more relevant was the 25 years he spent with US West, one of America's largest telephone companies. At least it used to be. It was based in Denver, Colorado, so that's where I'm off to next. They also remember Sol Trujillo in Colorado. Between 1995 and 2000, he headed US West, the state's largest private employer. Walk through downtown Denver and you can still see its old headquarters dominating the skyline. It now bears the name of the company that took it over. US West was the dominant telephone carrier across 14 US states, operating as a regulated monopoly across significant areas. In the 1990s, it attracted the nickname US Worst. Diane Callahan was the administrative director at the Office of Consumer Counsel, a government body representing the interests of utilities customers.
What they did to their customers is really pretty appalling. There were people who went out of business, who had small businesses in urban areas, not just rural areas, both. and they couldn't get customers because their customers couldn't reach them. They didn't have phone service at all.
In October 1999, Diane Callahan gave evidence before the Public Utilities Commission of Colorado, stating,
I conclude that US West has failed to inform consumers when it can provide service and when it cannot. Does not provide service to many of its customers in a timely manner. Appears to be ignoring obligations to provide service as a provider of last resort. Does not maintain its network at a level acceptable to consumers. And fails to respond to its customers' request for accurate, complete information.
There were people who, of course, trained their children to call 911 in an emergency, and there was no way to access 911.
You're kidding, even 911 didn't work?
No, not 911, not anything.
I decided it's time to head out into the back blocks, where US West had an obligation to supply basic telephone services. Near a fly speck on the map called Peyton, I find Dwight Havercorn.
How you doing? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Dwight gives me a tour of the area and recounts how it took 11 months to get a phone connected after he bought here in October 1998.
If we had a need of an ambulance or a fire truck or the county sheriff's office for some reason, we had no means in which to get a hold of them. We found a lot of the other neighbors having the same problems.
As Dwight later recounted to a public inquiry, US West constantly reassured him his connection was imminent. It did give him a mobile phone, but he says he had to drive up to 20 kilometres to get a signal.
2 or 3 months later, I'm not sure just when it was, I ran into a repairman for US West that was out here in the area working on some of the equipment that's buried in the ground. And he was an older gentleman, and we had a nice long talk, and he just told me, he says flat out, the reason I didn't have phone service is there wasn't any to be had, because it was going to require laying another cable. The services were full, and that's not what US West have been telling us. They just said that there were little technical problems and things would be done at some time in a later fashion.
This document confirms that at the time of Dwight's problems, US West had an official policy of not informing residential customers if delays in installing a new line were likely.
Customer not educated, CNE, was actually a policy that US West had. We had a copy of the policy which essentially said don't tell the customer whether we have facilities available or not when they call up and ask for phone service.
I've taken that information from you, and surely we're going to be asking the company just those questions.
I've come to the offices of the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. The job of its staff, in part, is to receive complaints from the public and ensure utility companies are meeting their service obligations.
We'll try to figure out if they have an issue that we regulate.
Yep.
And if they do, we take that information, we inquire the company. The company's got a couple of weeks by rule to respond to us, and we share that information with the customer. If they have a problem that we can fix, of course, we try to do that as well.
The Commission also has the power to sit as a tribunal, conducting inquiries and enforcing service standards. US West was a private company, but as Colorado's dominant phone company, it was required to meet certain obligations, including providing remote area customers with basic telephone service. In return, it was allowed to charge set rates in urban areas to cover the costs. In mid-1999, the Commission initiated proceedings investigating whether the company was in breach of its service obligations. The period of investigation covered 16 months, from January 1998 to April 1999. A period when Sol Trujillo was CEO and chairman of US West. The Commission's own staff testified that at a time when demand for phone services was booming, US West investment in plant and equipment was declining.
Staff believes the current situation is a result of a purposeful policy decision by